Basic Sewing Techniques, Chapter 37. Sewing skills allow you to personalize your clothing and items in your home. With a few skills, you can repair and alter garments. The techniques in this chapter will help you develop your sewing skills. To be certain about the fit of a garment or the way a project is going to look, you may need to baste parts of a garment together. Basting means holding two or more pieces of fabric together temporarily until they are permanently stitched. You could do this by hand basting, machine basting, or pen basting. When basting, make sure the stitches or pins are next to, but not directly on the seam line. Remember, basting is temporary. This makes the basting easy to remove after the permanent seam is shown. Machine stitching is used for the major seams of your sewing project and for directional stitching and stay stitching. All stitching on a garment should be sewn with a grain of the fabric. When you sew with the grain, you are less likely to stretch the fabric. Stitching in the direction of the grain is called directional stitching. How do you identify the direction of stitching? Move your finger along the raw edge of the fabric. The direction that smooths the yarn against the fabric is going with the grain. You can also look at the pattern. Pattern tissues have arrows pointing to the grain direction. As a rule, stitch from the wide to the narrow part of the garment. For example, sew from the hem to the waist of a skirt. Before you begin to put a garment or project together, it can be stay stitch. Stay stitching is a row of stitching on one layer of fabric that prevents the edges from stretching as you handle the fabric. Stay stitch after you mark the fabric, but before pinning or basting. Stay stitch is the direction of the grain. Use the same thread tension, the stitch length you would use for the project seams. Stay stitch a ½ inch from the raw side. Stay stitch edges are curved on the bias or cut off grains such as shoulder seams, necklines, and armholes. Pattern instructions dictate the sewing techniques you need to use to complete a garment. Some basic techniques you will probably see in a pattern instruction are explained here. Seams hold a garment together. A seam is made by sewing two pieces of fabric together. In general, seams are 5/8 inch wide. The fabric between the seam line and the cut edge is the seam allowance. Before you begin to sew, make a sample seam on a scrap of your fabric. Examine the seam to check the tension, stitch length, and general appearance. Then follow these steps to make a plain seam. Seam finishes. Seam finishes are used to prevent raveling on the cut edges of seam facings. The seam finish to use depends on the type of fabric and the amount of raveling. If you are unsure which finish to use, try different finishes on your fabric scraps. You have a zigzag finish, clean finish, serged finish. Interfacing is applied before the facing is attached to the garment. Facings are often used to finish raw edges such as necklines, front openings, armholes, or collars. There are several different types of facings. A shaped facing is used most often. It is cut the same shape as the edge onto which it is sewn. Before sewing a facing to a garment, you need to understand several techniques: grading, notching or clipping, understitching, sewing a facing. After learning about grading, notching, and understitching, it is easy to sew on facing. Gathers are soft folds of fabric. They are formed by pulling up basting stitches to make a larger piece of fabric fit onto a smaller space. Fullness on skirts, shirts, and sometimes window curtains, often created by gathers. A casing is a closed tunnel or a space of fabric that can hold a piece of elastic or drawstring in a waistband. Casings are also used on curtain rod pockets for simple curtains or valances. A casing is made like a hem. You generally fold over the edge of the waistband or the top of the curtain and sew it in place. The width of the casing will vary depending on the size opening needed. For example, waistband casings are usually 1 inch wide. To sew a self casing, follow these directions. The width of the elastic needs to be about 1/4 inch narrower than the finished casing so that you can pull it through the casing. If the casing is too wide, the elastic will twist inside the casing when the garment is worn. Hems. The bottom edges of pants, skirts, sleeves, and window treatments are finished with hems. The type of hem you will use depends on the type of fabric and the design of the project. Marking the hem. To mark the length of the hemline, put on shoes of the heel height you expect to wear with the finished garment. Have another person measure the correct length from the floor using a yardstick. Place pins or chalk marks at the same distance all the way around the garment. Check to make sure that the markings form an even line. Using the marked line as a guide, turn the hem to the wrong side of the garment. Insert pins at right angles along the fold line. The depth of the hem varies depending on the fullness of the garment. Pants usually have a hem of 1.5 to 2 inches. Skirt hems may vary 1 to 3 inches depending on the fullness. Use a narrower hem depth for a fuller skirt. Measure the hem depth needed plus 1/4 inch for finishing. Cut off the extra fabric from the edge of the hem. Machine stitch or hand sew 1/2 inch from the cut edge. Stitch only through the hem, not outside the garment. When a garment has extra fullness, it has to be eased so that it fits flat against the garment. Otherwise, it will be bulky and lumpy. There are several ways to finish raw edges of hems, such as zigzagging, clean finishing, and serging. Choose a method that best suits your fabric. Next, attach the hem to the garment. 2 methods include slip stitching, a method of hand stitching, and machine stitching. Garments do not always fit perfectly. Simple alterations can extend the usefulness of a garment. All it takes is a little planning, organizing, skill, and time management. Here you have instructions for lengthening or shortening a garment and adjusting the width of a garment. This is on how to serge seams, but we do not have a serger here at our school. You will answer these 12 questions on the document.